Hi, I'm Jeremy Kirk, Executive Editor with the Information Security Media Group. I'm pleased to be speaking with Fergus Hanson, who is head of the International Cyber Policy Center at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thank you for joining us, Fergus.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
So last year we saw ransomware attacks that embraced exploits that were leaked from US intelligence agencies for attacks that were financially damaging. Were these kind of watershed incidents for people who closely follow cyber policy?
I think this was a pretty significant development to have these very sophisticated tools out there in the wild, if you like, and allowing countries like Russia and North Korea to develop these tools that ended up causing some pretty serious damage to companies around the world. So just with the NotPetya case, you've got over $1 billion of damages being done to a whole series of companies in a whole range of different areas. So if you look at that sort of cost, they are pretty significant attacks, and I think we're probably going to be expecting similar and more attacks like this from nation states, so we really need to start getting ready for that.
Because they're essentially asymmetric. They cause a lot of damage, yet attribution can often be kind of fuzzy, and they cause an enormous amount of damage.
Well, that's exactly right. It takes a long time to reach attribution. So with both WannaCry and NotPetya, you had about a 6-month lag time between the actual incidents, and then a few countries coming out and saying, attributing them to Russia and North Korea, and even then you didn't have every country doing that. You had a very relatively small number. So then you really got the question of what comes next after that. We've got the attribution, but what are we going to do in terms of consequences and actually imposing costs on these countries?
Now, there's been a lot of discussion of the need to create sort of norms around cyberspace and rules for engagement similar to the rules of war. What's the status of that, and are we getting any closer to sort of creating kind of a cyber conflict treaty that countries would sign?
Well, a lot of this discussion around the need for a cyber treaty is actually being pushed by the same countries that are doing a lot of the violating of the norms. So we've got Russia and China out there pushing for this sort of agenda of having a treaty as if that's somehow going to restrain them from their bad behavior. So I'm a little bit skeptical of the idea of putting too much stock into Russia's push for this treaty, given that it's the one going out there so aggressively violating norms. States have already agreed that international law applies online the same way it applies offline. So I don't know that there's necessarily a huge need for that, but the discussion is still ongoing, and I think it's really an open discussion at the moment about whether that's going to eventuate or not. Personally, I think we don't necessarily need that sort of treaty, and I think it's playing into the hands of some of the bad actors in this space to go down that pathway.
It's really interesting, and so the other option is deterrence. What do we do to deter nation states from taking this sort of action? Are there ideas around that of how to do that?
Well, that's exactly right. So we've had this wave of attributions following WannaCry and NotPetya, where these countries have come out and said, Russia, you did this, North Korea, you did this, but we haven't really seen a lot of follow-up action to that. The latest round of US sanctions actually did couple, to an extent, the NotPetya attack with the Russian sanctions, but we didn't see a lot of other public action from other states. If we are really going to be effective in pushing states like North Korea and Russia to stop this sort of rogue behavior, there really does need to be some sort of serious cost for them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the cyber domain. So it could be economic sanctions, it could be other sort of forms of sanctions or pushback that occurs in other domains. So I think there's a couple of other options we've got there. It's not a huge toolkit, but if we're going to be serious about this, we definitely have to have at least some public pushback.
And diplomacy has proved successful. The US made the agreement with China to stop targeting intellectual property. And at least experts said that it appeared that China was not going after sort of private companies for their intellectual property.
Well, that's right. People often sort of dismiss this diplomacy out of hand as ineffective, but in fact it was able to push China into changing course on ceasing from engaging in commercial cyber espionage. And that was a pretty effective agreement. It wasn't perfect. No one believes that China's completely stopped this activity, but from the reports we've got, it was sort of people were wait and see, and maybe there was a drop-off in activity from China after it reached those agreements and changed to different tactics. We've had some different messages coming out of the US more recently about whether China's ramping up its activity again in that area. But at least in principle, China has agreed to stop that type of behaviour and created a sort of an agreement internationally that that kind of behaviour is wrong.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us, Fergus.
Thanks for having me.
I've been speaking with Fergus Hanson at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Jeremy Kirk.